We've been doing the series Unsung Heroes, and we're getting back into our swing of things here after a few weeks of things being kind of swinging around there. So we'll get back into our routine, and we're doing our Unsung Heroes. And today, it was a few weeks ago when I was up in Montana. I was doing one of my morning meditations, praying and stuff, and I was just thinking of this man. And so I wanted to talk about him a little bit because I feel he is an unsung hero, and that is Jonathan. And I mean, this is Jonathan, if you guys don't know, because there's like 10 different Jonathans in the Bible, but this is Jonathan, which was Saul, King Saul's son. And the more I went through 1 Samuel and I'm reading through all the stuff, you got to read the stories. I'm an Old Testament guy. I love the stories. I mean, who doesn't like a good war novel type thing, going on there? And but Jonathan to me seemed like a really, really neat guy. And Jonathan, when you read and you start reading, even before he really gets into the picture, you can tell that he was a man of character and integrity. Now, Jonathan's dad, Saul, King Saul, Israel asked to have a king. And so they started looking to see who they'd want and stuff. And so people, the way we do things, they looked at Saul and they go, hey, there's a guy, at the time, he loves God. That's good. We need that because we're a nation under God. That's Israel. And he was good looking, he's a man of reputation, all that kind of stuff. So they, in man's eyes, they picked Saul. And at the time, like I said, Saul had a relationship with the Lord. But later in his walk and stuff, we come to find out his walk wasn't really deep. And now Jonathan was not like his dad. Jonathan was a man who loved God. He was a man of integrity and a man of good character. And to be a person of good character, here's a definition for that. It says to show compassion, they're honest, they're fair, they display self-discipline, they make good judgments, show respect to others, show courage in standing up for beliefs, and have a strong sense of responsibility. Now, also being a man of good character, he was a man of integrity, which is the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles, a moral uprightness. And to me, I would rather in ministry, even today, and us being part of the church and that, I would pick somebody that is a man of character or a woman of character and integrity over somebody who's gifted. Because you can have all the gifting in the world, but if you don't have character and integrity, it doesn't work. Saul had all the stuff. He looked good. He had good following. He had all the stuff. But his character and his integrity was shallow. It was lacking. The more he started getting into his kingship and doing all the stuff he was doing, the more he got all about himself instead of about God. So, in 1 Samuel 18, verses 1 through 4, it says, and this, just so you know, this is right after David battled Goliath and did his stuff, and then he goes in and he's talking to the king, King Saul, and all that kind of stuff. It says, now when he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David. And Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Saul took him that day and would not let him go home to his father's house anymore. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan took off the robe that was on him and gave it to David, with his armor, even to his sword and his bow and his belt. This is very significant. David goes out and does his stuff, and he takes on Goliath and he does it with a slingshot. He didn't need all that stuff. But as he's in there speaking to the king, Jonathan's watching him, and he's already got to know him a little bit because he's been around. He's been playing the harp, and he's been doing the stuff, and he was around. And but what happened here was when he saw the king talking to him and David talking back to Saul, Jonathan became a kindred spirit. He recognized in Jonathan recognized in David the heart after God, the one who stood for God, the one who wanted to put God first. And that touched the spirit that Jonathan had in him and his love for the Father also. And I think even at that point in that time, I think he recognized something in David that Jonathan did not see in his dad. Now, Jonathan is basically, in all principles of how we do it, the prince. He is next in line to be king. Because when a king rules a nation and that king is gone, then the son usually steps up and becomes in place. He's the inheritance, that position in that place. That means that Jonathan has the right, the way things work normally in government, of that kind of government, to be king and to control Israel and all the people. But when he stood up and he took off his robe and his belt and gave his sword and all this stuff over to David, he was already understanding what the Father was doing in David with passing on the mantle of kingship on him. Jonathan saw it, and he received it. Jonathan was not jealous of David. He did not envy David. He did not try to do anything to push him away. He saw the calling David had on his life and his love for the Father, and he acknowledged that. Now, that's an important thing to remember in a person. Verse 19, 1 Samuel 19, 1-4. Now, Saul spoke to Jonathan his son and to all his servants that they should kill David. Stop there for a second. The more into Saul's reign and the more they had to battle, the more they had to do, and the more God blessed David, the more Saul disliked him and was jealous of him. The more that David was given and the more he was honored in and blessed in, even though David did everything he did to bless God, and he did it for God, Saul had a problem with it. Because the people started saying, well, Saul slays his thousands, but David sells his 10,000s. I mean, you have to read 1 Samuel and stuff to get to know all the story. We don't have time for that today. But I'm just trying to get into the understanding of who Jonathan is in this. Because David had a heart for God and was just doing what God wanted him to do. I mean, David was happy playing the harp and slaying lions and bears and taking care of the sheep. God's the one who said, hey, I need you to come in and be this person and be the king that I'm going to usher in. And even to the point to where Saul was losing it. The hand of God was taken off of him because of his attitude. He started doing things in his wisdom and his ways. He wouldn't wait on God or even obey God when God asked him to do things. He started thinking, well, I know, I'm king. I know enough. I know what's best. And, well, he tried to justify it. He tried to blame other people for what he was doing and his decisions. But he's the king. And the more he did that, the more the hand of God was taken off of him. The more the hand of God was taken off of him, the more the bitterness and the anger and the jealousy to David was. But the thing is Jonathan, through the whole thing, kept his eyes on God. There's a little thing I want to say. It has to do with the integrity and character that I feel Jonathan did. And this is a little side note that they did. It's off of Daniel 6:23. And it says, the man or woman of integrity is a man or woman of faith. He or she trusts in God. He or she walks by faith, not by sight. He or she glances at the lions, but fixes their gaze on the Lord. And Saul kept looking more and more on the things, the lions, the world, what people thought, the enemies, and what was going on. And Jonathan kept his eyes fixed on the Lord. And he knew that David was supposed to be raised up as king. So he had to end up stepping in the gap. So, like I was saying, so Saul spoke to Jonathan his son and to all the servants that they should kill David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted greatly in David. So Jonathan told David, saying, My father Saul seeks to kill you. Therefore, please be on your guard until morning, and stay in a secret place and hide. And I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are, and I will speak with my father about you. Then what I observe I will tell you. Thus Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul his father, and said to him, Let not the king sin against his servant, against David, because he has not sinned against you, and because his works have been very good toward you. Everything David did was to bless Saul. David wanted Saul to be a good king. David could have came in and took him out and just took it over and been king because he was already anointed as king. But he wanted Saul to finish well. And Saul would not and could not do it. He had to do it his way, what he thought, and he had to control things. If he would have been all about what God wanted to do, none of that stuff would have happened. But luckily, Jonathan saw the call in the heart of David, and he stood in the gap, and he tried to intercede for David with his dad, and said, Hey, you can't kill him. This guy, all he's doing is just to honor you and to honor God. He's trying to take care and honor the people, bless the people. You cannot kill him for that. So it gave a little bit of a reprieve for a while, but then as they started going out and doing more battles, and David took his soldiers and was victorious and conquered thousands and all that kind of stuff, Saul kept getting more and more bitter and more angry and wanted to even kill him more and more. It got to the point that Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, Let the Lord require it at the hands of David's enemies. It's 1 Samuel 20:16. And it's basically, Jonathan realized, you know what? I'm making a covenant, my family to your family. My family's not the one that's supposed to be in kingship here. It's going to be not my line, it's going to be yours. And that's important. Because in 1 Samuel 20, 30 through 33, 34. I'll read that. I don't have that up there. I'm going to read it. I only have the 33 up there. Verse 30 says, Then Saul's anger was aroused against Jonathan. And he said to him, You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? I mean, he's so angry at his son, he's even bashing his son's mom. For as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, you shall not be established, nor your kingdom. Now therefore send and bring him to me, for he shall surely die. Saul's saying, as long as David is alive, you cannot be king, and your place is to be king. He's trying to tempt him into getting people to kill David and to start hating David the way he does. But Jonathan could not do that. Jonathan had his eyes on God through the whole thing. He saw God in David. He knew what was going on. He knew that Jonathan knew that David was supposed to be king. And then verse 32, And Jonathan answered Saul, his father, and said to him, Why should he be killed? What has he done? Then Saul cast a spear at him to kill him, by which Jonathan knew that it was determined by his father to kill David. You think he would catch on a little quicker. He's already having to talk his dad out of killing him a couple times. But it gets to the point where Jonathan's like, No, Dad. He is the one that the anointing's on. He stood in the gap. He interceded. He tried to stop Saul from being and doing what Saul was trying to do. Jonathan was willing to lay down his own crown to let David have his crown. He was willing to stand in the gap to the point of even having his own father try to kill him out of anger because of standing up for what God wanted. Some of us have a hard time straightening someone's crown, even if it doesn't require us removing our own. I mean, we all want to do what God wants us to do, but we still have a problem lifting somebody up to give them attention or let them be who God's called them to be. Because sometimes we're called just to help people be who they're supposed to be. And that was Jonathan's place there. That's what Jonathan was doing. Jonathan was not even, he was even so willing to help David be all that God called him to be, to the point where he would even remove the stuff that the world wanted him to be. He had, or should have had, the right to be king, but he denied himself those rights so God could be glorified in David. How many of us would be willing to step down from something we think we should deserve to help bless somebody to have something that they even know they don't deserve? That's a real twist on words, but you got to think about it for a minute. Would you take off your crown of kingship to honor somebody so they could be king? That's not the American way. It's not what's going on right now over in Israel. There's a group of people who think they deserve something and they're willing to kill for it. Instead, if they really knew who God was, they would lay down everything they think they deserve and bless those that God's called. Jonathan is a great example for us to do that. Jonathan, a man of integrity and character, did not keep his eyes on what he thought he should have, but what on he knew God wanted. That's what we need to start asking ourselves. When God brings somebody into our lives, are you going to stand in the gap for them and you're going to defend them the way Jonathan defended David? Or are you going to let the ideas of the world, like the ideas of Saul, what he had, be the ones that influence what goes on? Happens all the time. The world wants what the world wants, and they don't look at what the Father wants. Jonathan kept his eyes on what the Lord wanted, and he stood in the gap for a person with a kindred spirit. He was a true brother, and he was willing to die for him. He was so much willing to do what he needed to do, and it speaks of the character of Jonathan, that even in the midst of all that, and Saul still trying to do and be in control and do all the stuff he did, Saul sent out Jonathan and his brothers into battle, and Jonathan, honoring his father still in the midst of all this stuff, went out, and Jonathan and his brothers were killed. That's in 1 Samuel 31, verse 2. They go out and they're killed in battle. And as they're battling and they're off doing their part and they're killed, Saul and them are in their part doing their thing and they're being overwhelmed and they're being defeated. Why? Because Saul's eyes were on Saul instead of on God, and he was not following God's direction. And then it got to the point that Saul, I think, came into a realization of how ignorant he had been being in the situation. And he saw them being overwhelmed by the enemy and got word that his sons were killed and all that. And he got to the point where instead of returning to the Father and asking God for repentance or that, he just, out of guilt and all the stuff and all, just Saul being Saul, he fell on his own sword and took his own life. Jonathan died honoring and being a man of integrity. He might have died in battle needlessly, but he was trying to do it in a way of showing, hey, you got to honor. But in the midst of the whole thing, he interceded, he fought, he stood in the gap. And not only did that, is every time he came to David, when David was being distraught and being chased and when Saul and them were chasing him, trying to take him, he encouraged him and blessed him and helped him become all that he could be. David wasn't perfect. He was far from it. But I think David, seeing the actions of someone like Jonathan, encouraged David to be who he became. Because, God says, David's a man after my own heart. But I look at Jonathan, he is a man after God's heart. He straightened a crown when he didn't have to. He gave up everything that was promised to him to give to somebody else because he saw the call of God on their life. I think Jonathan is an unsung hero. And I think we could all strive to be more like him. To look to see what maybe God or who God might put in your life, that you could be someone that stands in the gap for them. Other people might not see it. Other leaders might not see it, but you might see it because you might see God putting something on them. There's something that you might see that God says, you need to intercede for that person. I have my hand on them. I have something for them to do. Even though other people are trying to get the credit or trying to take things away, take care of that person. That's Jonathan. This world needs more Jonathans. Because as the world gets more and more messed up, God's going to have to call more and more people to stand up and be noticed and start carrying some of the responsibility. And I'm sorry that they're not called to carry the responsibility by themselves, but they have people around them that nobody else might see that helps them succeed. We would not have the line of David if Jonathan didn't do what Jonathan did. I mean, God would have got it back around somehow because he does what he needs to do. But he asked Jonathan, and Jonathan stepped up. And I think, boy, did he step up. And I'm sure God's going to start asking more of us to start stepping up. It might not bring any attention to you, but it'll bring attention to where I need it, is what he's going to say. And our job is to be obedient. The outcome is up to him. Amen? So let's all go out there and let's all be Jonathans. And who knows, you might be one of the Jonathans that gets to put on the crown. And be the king. Or whatever he might have you lead. Or he might have you lay it all down so the person that he calls can succeed. And I think the people who help the ones succeed are more important than the ones who succeed. I truly do. Let's pray.